propaganda and political exercise to accuse Israelis of crimes, and that makes Hamas very happy.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Backstory. I'm Dana Lewis. The International Criminal Court, based in The Hague, has ruled it has jurisdiction to investigate war crimes by Israel and against Israel in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. In part one of Israel, Palestinian Human Rights, we spoke to Palestinians about why they think Israel won't cooperate with the ICC. They say it's because Israel is trying to escape punishment for unlawful killings in the occupied territories. And we examined one of those cases, that of the killing of Ahmed Erekat. Israel, however, sees it another way. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said the ICC decision is absurd, calling it undiluted anti-Semitism and the height of hypocrisy, adding in his words that Israeli brave soldiers take every precaution to avoid civilian casualties against the worst terrorists in the world. Neither the Israelis or Palestinians I spoke to wanted to be interviewed together, so we have split the podcast into two parts, and this is part two. All right, to get the Israeli side of what's taking place with the International Criminal Court, I want to introduce you to Professor Avi Bell, who is a lecturer at the University of San Diego Law School, and he joins us from Jerusalem, where he also lectures at Bar-Ilan's Faculty of Law. Hi, Avi. Nice to meet you.
Good to see you, too.
So look, this criminal court ruling that they are now saying that they have jurisdiction to investigate war crimes alleged by Palestinians against Israel is pretty earth-shaking, I think, for Israelis. Would you agree?
Well, let's be a little bit more precise about what happened here.
Let's.
The court has been going through a process of deciding whether it can investigate what it calls the situation in Palestine for over a decade already. And so in 2009, the PLO asked the court to take jurisdiction. And the court kicked that around for a few years. The Palestinian Authority ran off to the General Assembly to get a resolution, came back to the court. Finally, in 2015, the prosecutor decided that she did have jurisdiction and opened up a preliminary investigation. What's happened recently is just that after 5 years of this preliminary investigation, the prosecutor decided she wanted to upgrade this to a full investigation, and she went to a pretrial chamber of the court to ask that they authorize her, or more properly, to approve the decision she'd already made to upgrade this to an investigation. They did that several weeks ago, and now, as expected, she is announcing that there's going to be a full investigation.
Nobody likes to be investigated. Why does Israel not want to be investigated by the ICC?
Again, what's being investigated here is the so-called situation in Palestine. And what that would mean would be crimes that have been committed on what the ICC calls the territory of the state of Palestine, and crimes that have been committed by citizens of what the ICC calls the state of Palestine. Now, if you think about this would seem to be a great threat actually to the Palestinians. The Palestinians don't have a system for prosecuting war crimes. In fact, they commit them quite openly. They have all sorts of other internal problems. They commit torture and various other kinds of human rights violations. But when the ICC pretrial chamber issued its announcement, and then afterwards, when the prosecutor announced she was going to go forward, this was what the announcement was welcomed by various Palestinian terrorist groups like Hamas, and was panned by Israel, by the United States, Australia, Canada.
Let's just stop for a minute.
Yes.
Because I don't want that to be lost. Because the idea that the International Criminal Court is investigating Israel only is a misnomer. It says
it's not. It's really not. It's not.
Look at Palestinian crimes as well by Hamas, which is considered
no. So let me finish. What I was going to say was there's a reason why Hamas was very, very happy about this investigation.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, because they're about to investigate it too. Why would they be dancing in the street and celebrating an investigation of the ICC's ruling that it has jurisdiction over Palestine and also over Israel?
Because they understand what you understand and I understand, and the U.S. government understands, and the German government understands, the Canadian government understands, et cetera. And that is that this is a political process. It's not a legal process. There is no chance whatsoever that any defendants of Hamas will end up in the dock. Certainly not that any of them will be convicted. They understand that. This is a process that's designed to accuse Israelis. I'm doubtful that there will ultimately be any convictions of Israelis either, but the purpose of this is it's a propaganda and political exercise to accuse Israelis of crimes, and that makes Hamas very happy, and that makes Israel very unhappy. It has really very little to do with the law of it. It's the criticism that's been issued so far about the process is that it's fairly clear that under the Rome Statute that gives the court its authority, it does not have this jurisdiction. There is not a state of Palestine according to international law. Even if there were, it's not clear that it has territory over which it can claim jurisdiction. And if the court is willing to throw those things out, those basic questions of jurisdiction, and ignore the law, simply to move forward with this process, it's clear that it's not going to be respecting the law when it comes to other issues. And I'll say one more thing, that there's been a preliminary investigation going on since 2015. And under the rules of the court, the prosecutor has to report on her preliminary investigation every year. And so we have 5 years of reports in which we can see what the prosecutor has been doing. And she's been fairly clear about the fact that she's been ignoring allegations of very, very serious human rights violations by the Palestinians. She's, other than pro forma statements, has ignored all crimes by Palestinians, and has been, over the years, spinning various theories as to why there's Israeli wrongdoing that she wants to look at. And so it's fairly clear what this prosecution, as it moves forward, is about. It's not going to be about actual war crimes or human rights violations, certainly not by Palestinians.
Well, I mean, a lot of critics would say every time anybody wants to investigate Israel's use of force against just not terrorists in Gaza, but citizens who are caught in the crossfire, and there were many that were killed in 2014 in Israel's push into the Gaza Strip, and then also in 2018 when they rushed the border fence, that Israel always claims anti-Semitism and that it's a false narrative. What do you say to that?
I think that's really immaterial. The question is whether this is a good investigation, not whether Israel is right to claim this, that, or the other about the motives of its critics. So I think that we can ignore that. It's not really important. The question is, in substance, is this a good investigation? Is this an investigation that's likely to lead to convictions of serious criminals, or is this a political investigation? I think that the record of the court is pretty clear that there's no reason to be confident this is going to be a good investigation. I'll add that, if I may, the court has been around now for almost 2 decades, and the number of final secure convictions that it's reached can be counted on one hand. This is not a court, despite the great hopes when it was created. This is not a court that's really in a position to create accountability for serious crimes. What it really is a court that engages in political circus. And now that the political circus has moved to one of the areas where the law international law itself has been turned into political circus, there's very, very good reason for fearing that this court is never going to recover from the descent into politics.
It may well wind up investigating this and issuing, I assume, warrants for some of the military leadership in Israel. And some of the Israeli newspapers, Haaretz and others, have reported that those people have already been warned and they've already been told by the government not to cooperate with the court. But that looks like where we're heading, that they will be wanted and be like international criminals, be wanted on worldwide warrants and be unable to travel, etc.
I think that's been very clear from the very outset of the process, that it's designed to result in criminal accusations against Israelis, Israeli Jews, obviously, not Israeli Arabs, and fill in the crimes later on. I don't think that it makes any difference if they actually committed any crimes or whether the court has any jurisdiction. It's fairly clear at this point that there's no jurisdiction. Whether any crimes will come up, that's an interesting question. I doubt it, but the end result is known anyway. We know that there will be ultimately an attempt to press charges unless there's very serious political fallout from this decision.
I mean, war is never pretty, and I've covered a lot of them. And would you say that there are parallels with also the Americans, maybe in Iraq, but definitely in Afghanistan, because that's been talked about, and the ICC wanted to investigate some of those?
I think there are parallels with all of the NATO countries, and that's because the Israeli military very consciously attempts to follow the legal framework that NATO countries impose internally. And so the Israeli army lawyers are looking all the time at what NATO countries like the United States and Britain and other countries that have fought in Iraq and Afghanistan have done. And on that basis, they've adjusted the rules to try to abide by the laws of war. And I think that it's also clear that there's another parallel, which is that the court has been reaching out in recent years to try to expand its jurisdiction. All of the convictions so far in the court have been of African defendants. And that has created a lot of criticism about the bias of the court, basically that it goes after defendants from weak countries. And so the courts try to expand its jurisdiction by going after defendants from countries that have never joined the court and therefore have never given the court jurisdiction. And that's primarily the United States and Israel. Now, Israel, because it's fairly weak politically, the United States for a different reason. It's because actions against the United States are perceived to be popular in Europe, which resents the United States. Now, whether there will be any ultimate proceedings against the United States remains to be seen. The United States has much more formidable tools to fight back politically. Israel has many fewer tools, and so I think that the path in Israel is clear.
You wrote an article, it said, what can Israel do? It must act on all fronts to impair the legitimacy of the International Criminal Court, impede its investigation in any way possible, and use the opportunity to foster international cooperation against the ICC. I mean, you're drawing some pretty tough red lines there.
I think that the ICC has become a politicized body that instead of pursuing justice, impairs it. And I think that Israel has to call attention to that fact. I actually think the ICC is doing an excellent job of delegitimizing itself. What Israel has to do is highlight that for the world. Again, the ICC is not a story of success, but for its wading into the Arab-Israeli conflict. It's an institution that is widely perceived as a failure. And this past year, there have been numerous efforts to try to reform the institution, to get it to live up to what its initial hopes were. I think that those efforts will fail. I think that this investigation will help it to fail. And I think that so long as this is the course that it wants to follow, Israel should help it along that course.
Avi, last question to you. I know, and I appreciate your time. Where does it leave Israel, do you think, if there is an investigation, and despite what the ICC may say, and hopefully they would absolutely find that Hamas has carried out all sorts of crimes, from torturing their own people to unlawful acts like, blowing up bombs in cafes in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem, and firing rockets into civilian areas and targeting. I mean, Israelis have been a target of you want to talk about illegal warfare. Certainly you can make the case against Hamas. But if they come out against Israel and they say the war in 2014 was illegal and a war crime, and 2018 when Israel was seen to be firing on civilians, and also settlements themselves, settlement expansion and occupation of the West Bank, what will that do to Israel?
The court, it's important to note, the court does not act against states or organizations. The court brings charges against individuals. Right? So if one sees, for example, war crimes committed by Hamas, the potential defendants are the terrorists themselves in Hamas, and also their aiders and abettors. And so, for example, senior officials in the Palestinian Authority who are funding Hamas terrorists after the fact, not knowing that the funds are being used in pursuance of terrorism, would also be liable according to the law. But again, there's no legal proceeding here. We know the results are going to be that there will be no Hamas defendants in the dock. There will certainly be no defendants in the dock from the Palestinian Authority. What you're going to have is the kind of propaganda exercise by the ICC that you see in so many other places in international bodies, like you see in the UN Human Rights Council, the UN General Assembly, the UN Committee on the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinians. You're going to see a flood of papers with accusations that they know will never have to stand up in court, and the propaganda exercise will be its own reward. It's not going to result in the improvement of accountability under international law. It'll actually undermine that, but it will be a very potent propaganda exercise against Israel. And I think that is the most important thing for Israel to deal with.
Professor Avi Bell, toda rabba, shalom, and thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you for having me.
We should add the United States has also expressed concern about the International Criminal Court decision to extend its jurisdiction into Palestinian areas. Quote, "We will continue to uphold our strong commitment to Israel and its security, including by opposing actions that seek to target Israel unfairly," the State Department said. The United States says it firmly opposes and is deeply disappointed by the decision of the ICC to investigate the Palestinian situation. Quote, "The ICC has no jurisdiction over this matter. Israel is not a party to the ICC and has not consented to the court's jurisdiction. And we have serious concerns about the International Criminal Court's attempt to exercise its jurisdiction over Israeli personnel," the U.S. State Department added. That's our backstory on Israel and Palestinian human rights. Please subscribe to this podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm Dana Lewis, and I'll talk to you again soon.